This video will begin our discussion on what we are calling extensions of Mendel. Basically, these are inheritance patterns that at first glance appear to violate Mendelian inheritance, but for a wide variety of reasons, they actually do not, and simply show us how complicated the relationships between genotypes and phenotypes can be. But let's quickly review where we have been. So far, we have only dealt with what is termed simple Mendelian inheritance, which involves dominant and recessive genes and through genetic crosses very clearly illustrates the laws of segregation and independent assortment. As stated in the first slide, these represent the simple cases, and there are many instances that are more complex, despite still following these foundational laws. So here's a look at the inheritance patterns we will explore in this series. As you can see, there are many cases of more complex inheritance. But again, keep in mind that in each case, we are still following the tenets of Mendelian inheritance. But for most of these, simply the connection between genotype and phenotype is a bit different. So let's begin our exploration of this topic with a bit of terminology. A wild type allele refers to the most prevalent version of a trait in a population. This is normally the dominant allele, but that is not a requirement. Sometimes this is referred to as the normal version of the gamete, but in this case, the word normal only implies that it is common. Note that in large populations, there can be more than one wild type, and this is referred to as a genetic polymorphism. So what are recessive alleles? Often referred to as mutant allele, but just like wild type, this is simply a reflection of how common they are in the population. However, most recessive alleles are due to mutations that produce non-functional or less functional versions of the protein, hence why they elicit a different phenotype. But why would a mutation for a loss of function in a protein be inherited recessively? Recall that recessive inheritance means that you need two copies of the recessive allele to produce the recessive phenotype. Mutant phenotypes are often inherited recessively because a single copy of the wild type is often enough to produce the protein needed for the wild type phenotype. There are two possible explanations for this as shown here, but in each case, because a single copy of the wild-type allele produces the wild-type phenotype, one must have two copies of the mutant allele to display that phenotype. Less common are mutant alleles that are inherited in a dominant fashion. There are a few scenarios where this takes place. One is that the mutant allele causes a gain of function in the protein, meaning it either gains a new function or becomes highly expressed. A second scenario is when the mutant protein actually antagonizes the normal protein, leading to an altered phenotype. Lastly, when only one copy of the wild type allele is not enough, you get an altered phenotype, which would show a dominant pattern of inheritance. Now that we have some basic terminology and concepts, we are ready to dive into the many scenarios of altered inheritance patterns.